Today I'd like to talk to you about growth. And if I give this sermon a title, I'd call it A Time for Growth. A Time for Growth. I want to read to you from the book of Luke chapter 2 verses 39 and 40. So when they had performed all things according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city, Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. I'm reading from the New King James Version, but it's talking about what happened to Jesus after the incidences surrounding his birth, after he was dedicated at the temple and so forth. The Bible says that they took him back home to their home city. And there he grew. The old King James puts it this way: he grew in wisdom and in knowledge and in favor with God and man. In other words, he grew physically, he grew spiritually, he grew emotionally, and he grew socially. Those were things that happened in those years. In fact, theologians call them the quiet years, those years that we don't know anything about, those years between the incidences of his birth and the time that he first appeared on the scene at the age of 12 in the temple in Jerusalem. We don't know what happened during those 10 and a half, 12, or 11 years. But we knew that Jesus was growing during that time. They were the quiet years, we call them. I would dare say to you, my brothers and sisters, that we are experiencing a quiet time that not one of us really wanted or asked for, even though in some ways all of us needed a quiet time. One of the reasons that some of us have never been able to grow in the way that we want to or the way that we should is because we've been too busy. We couldn't sit down and talk to our children because we had to hurry up and get out and go to work. We couldn't have family worship in our homes because everybody had a different schedule and we had to go to soccer practice or tap dance practice or gymnastics practice or basketball practice or something. We didn't even have time to talk to our spouses because we were on different schedules, going different places at different times, taking care of the children and so forth. And this pandemic has forced most of us to just stop. Oh yeah, there are some people who have to go to the hospitals, and God bless our first responders, the nurses and the doctors and the technicians and the EMT workers and the firefighters and the police officers and others who just have to be out there. But for a great many people in the population, this is a time when you just have to stay at home. Now, admittedly, some of you have been going crazy staying at home with those children who are at home doing their schoolwork. I hope that you'll have a greater appreciation for the teachers when these go back to a normal or somewhat normal school situation. You see now what it takes for teachers to actually educate your children. But I would like to submit to you that just as Jesus grew in these quiet years, there are opportunities for us to grow in this quiet time. I heard one of my preacher's friends said not so long ago that you should never not take advantage of a good storm. We're in the middle of a storm. But let's take advantage of it and see, what does it mean? How can we grow? Well, how did Jesus grow? He grew physically. In other words, he grew stronger physically. How do we grow stronger physically? We grow stronger physically by exercise and by food. Of what we put into our bodies and how we work off that energy. And I'm not going to give you a health lecture here because I've transgressed enough, but I will tell you this. One of the things we have to be careful of, especially those of us who are in communities of color, is guarding our health. We know that we are being harder hit by this pandemic than any other groups of people, and much of it is because we are the sufferers of diseases that are controllable. Diabetes, for the most part, although there are some genetic markers that predispose some of us to diabetes. High blood pressure, yes, there's some genetic markers that predispose some of us to high blood pressure. Obesity, Yeah, there are some genetic markers that predispose some of us to obesity. All that being said, these three things, which are the leading indicators of people who are likely to suffer severely if they contract COVID, these things can be controlled by lifestyle choices. We can decide what we're going to eat. We can decide how much we're going to exercise. We can decide how much salt we're going to put on our food. And the truth of the matter is that all of us need to take this time as a time to reevaluate the way we do our food intake. I will tell you, my brothers and sisters, one of the things that my wife has been doing with us during this time is she's just not letting me eat as much as I like to eat. And while I don't like that, I do like what she's trying to do. She's making sure I get one nice balanced meal at the beginning of the day in the late morning, one nice balanced meal in the early evening, and that's it. Only thing else I can have is some fruit or something like that, something very light. But she has been diligent about making sure we get lots and lots of vegetables. Of course, I'm a vegetarian, so that's all I get. But even if you're not, and I'm not trying to tell you you have to go vegan or anything like that. What I am saying to you is you ought to start making sure that much more of your diet contains vegetables, multicolored vegetables, and fruits and so forth that will nourish you. You also need to get exercise. Most of us don't get enough exercise, and it's very difficult to do it during this time, especially because in New Jersey, where I am, the weather has been kind of difficult, but the weather's getting warmer now, and I know you can't go to the parks are closed and so forth. You can walk to the end of your block and come back. You can do a push-up in your house or some kind of walking around the house. I walk up and down the stairs several times a day, even when I don't need to, just to get that little extra exercises and go out in the backyard. But we need to understand that we need to take care of our physical health. We also need to take care of our spiritual health. This is the time, this quiet time, is the time when we really ought to take the time to get to know God better, to pray more, to spend more time reading our Bibles and reading things of a spiritual nature. You may say, well, I don't have a library at home, but most of us have smartphones or we have computers, and all you have to do is just tap in a few keywords, and you can get access to any books that you want to read that will help you grow spiritually. Quiet time is needed for spiritual growth. And the reason quiet time is needed is because you've got to have time to let that stuff sink into you. Why is it that the greatest philosophers and the greatest spiritual leaders in the world have been people who understood that sometimes you just got to get away from everybody, get away from all the noise, get away from all the busyness, and think and talk to God and let God talk to you. The other thing it says about Jesus is that he grew in favor with God. Yes, he got to know God in those quiet years, but also with man. In other words, Jesus was a social being. Even as a child growing up, he learned how to make friends. The Bible tells us in the book of Proverbs, chapter 16 and verse 24, that if you want to be friends, you have to show yourself friendly. We know that Jesus was a social person because much of his ministry, he was spending his time talking to people, going to dinners with them, associating with people in all kinds of classes. In fact, the Pharisees accused him of not being a prophet because he spent so much time with people who were not, people of good reputation. But he did this because he was a social person. He knew that you couldn't reach people unless you first showed an interest in them as people. And he did. And so his words meant more because the people knew that he actually cared about them. I would like to say that in this time of pandemic, we ought to take more time to reach out to those who we care about and who care about us. A few days ago, I got a call from a young man, one of my son's friends, my youngest son's friends. We hadn't seen each other for a couple of years, but he called, he said, I just want to check on you and Mom. Pop, how you doing? And we talked for about an hour. And we talked about some of everything, what he was doing in life, his profession, what he was planning to do. He was thinking about moving and so forth. But the important thing is that he reached out to me and it made my day. I said, man, you have made my day. A couple of days later, I got a call from one of my oldest son's good friends. And he said the same thing, I'm just calling to check on you. See how you and mom are doing. And we talked for a long time. And it just lifted me up so that these young men who are my son's friends called to check on us. You need to call somebody and check on them. You need to FaceTime them, Skype them, however you can see their face if you can do that. But at least you ought to call people and let them know that you care about them. In this time when we can't get together socially very much, it's a great time to reach out to somebody and to reach out to somebody often and let them know that you're looking at them and thinking about them. This is the time for growth, this quiet time. Just as Jesus' quiet time was a time when he grew in these critical areas, it's a time when we can grow. We can come out of this better than we were when we went in. But now here are the things you have to understand, and they're just 5 of them I'm going to give you. First of all, the kind of growth we're talking about. Physical, spiritual, and social. It takes time. It takes time for a person to grow from a little bitty child to a grown person. It takes time for a 98-pound weakling to build up his muscles to become a 210-pound strong man. It takes time for someone who is suffering with an illness to exercise and work in such a way that they find themselves able to be vigorous and vibrant. It takes time. We live in a world where everybody wants a quick fix. We want everything to happen just like that. We trade in our computers when they get too slow. But I will tell you, this is a time when we need to slow down and recognize everything meaningful in your life is going to take time to develop. Second thing is, it takes consistency. To grow, you have to keep on growing. You can't stop. You have to be consistent. You have to keep doing the same things every day, every day. I sometimes think about my mother when we were growing up. My mother was a nurse, but she had this regimen. She should have been in the army, but she had this attitude about how life was supposed to go. So every Monday she would wash the clothes. That was when she did her laundry. She did her laundry Monday, wash and dry the clothes, and ironed them. When I came home from school, she would usually be in bed sleeping because she worked at nights. She worked from 11 to 7 for many years. And so she would be asleep. But when I came home, I knew that I would find in the dining room, I would find on a rack that she had hanging on the back of the dining room door, I'd find all of my pants for the week, ironed and pressed and on hangers. I would find shirts, enough shirts for me to have shirts for the whole week there on hangers. My underwear would be ironed and folded. Yeah, my mother ironed my underwear. It's a wonderful thing. Don't knock it. But my underwear would be ironed and folded and stacked on the dining room table. And my socks would be in a certain spot. And all I had to do was pick up my socks, pick up my underwear, get my pants and get my shirts, hang up my shirts and my pants in my closet, put the underwear and socks in my drawer, because I knew that on Monday morning at 6:45, Sadie Miles was going to say, time to get up. I had 45 minutes to get up, go to the bathroom, wash up, and go in my closet and grab a shirt and grab a pair of pants and put on socks and come down, because breakfast was on the table at 7:30. If I got there at 7:35, breakfast was cold. That was what she did. And because she did that, I was never late. Even though I walked to school, several blocks to school, I was never late for school one day in my life. She understood the value of consistency. You just got to keep doing stuff. Even if you slip and fall off a little bit, just get right back on it. Just keep doing the things that you need to do in terms of your diet, your health, your prayer life, your reading life. Just keep doing it day after day. And you will find the more you do it, the easier it will become. Third thing, To grow, you have to have nourishment. And nourishment requires a couple of things. First of all, nourishment requires putting something in. Putting something in. If you want to be nourished intellectually, you got to read. You got to study. If you want to be nourished spiritually, you have to read, you have to study, but you also have to pray. You have to talk to God, but you also have to have quiet time when God talks to you. So you have to put something in to be nourished. And if you're not putting anything in, you're not going to be nourished enough to grow. This is not a time to binge watch on Netflix, even though some of you are. This is a time to binge watch on Jesus. This is a time to put your emphasis on prayer. This is the time to not say, oh, I'm so bored. This is the time to get into your word. This is the time to ask those questions. What is really important in my life? Because guess what? You know what's happened? This pandemic is showing us that the things we thought were important really aren't. Some of us thought it was so important to get to the mall every week. Malls have been closed for weeks. Nobody has died yet from not going to the mall. Pardon me. But what we have seen is that the important things, the essential things, the food stores, the drug stores, the hardware stores, they're still open. And they're still doing business. People who chronically were underpaid and undervalued, now we call them essential workers. Because we realize that you can't do any hospital work unless you got doctors and nurses. And by the way, no matter how good the doctors do and no matter how much the nurses do to help people recuperate, if the hospital isn't a clean environment, you're going to get infections. So now the janitor is suddenly an essential worker. Before he was just a guy with the mop and the bucket and a bunch of keys. Now he's an essential worker. We need to understand, and perhaps this is helping us understand, that people that we didn't think about much, they do things that we depend on every day of our lives. And I do hope that after this pandemic is over, that they will be compensated better than they have been in the past. But that's another thought. The next thing I want to say is that we have got to have time to reflect. Growth requires reflection. You don't just do stuff, you have to think about stuff. And reflection takes time. Sometimes you do things and you have to say, well, why did I do that? Why am I thinking that? What do I need to think that's different? If anything is positive about this, it is that we should learn how to reflect and think more about what God is trying to do in our lives. God's trying to tell us something. And we have to be awake enough and reflective enough to understand what he's saying. God doesn't speak to us in the midst of the crowd. He speaks to us in the small spots. Elijah found that out. God wasn't speaking to him in a whirlwind or a storm or lightning and thundering. There was a still small voice. And in this time, when we've got lots of quiet time, rather than becoming bored, let's listen for the still small voice of God. And finally, growth is the work of a lifetime. It takes a lifetime to grow. It takes a lifetime to grow from a child, from an infant to a child, to a teenager, to an adult, to a mature person, to a senior person. It takes time. And it takes time for us to be all that God wants us to be. But I guarantee you this, he has given us time to grow. And now is the time to start growing. So I just want to encourage you today to take this seriously as your time to grow in the grace of God, to grow physically and spiritually and mentally. And don't forget to reach out and touch somebody and share what you've learned. God bless you.